Welcome to another episode of Building Success, a real estate podcast. My name is Nick, and I will once again be your guide as we talk to some of the best and brightest in the worlds of real estate tech, operations, and financials from across the globe. This podcast would not be possible without listeners such as yourselves. So if you like what you hear and you'd like to hear more of it, please consider liking and subscribing to the podcast wherever you get it from, whether it be iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, even YouTube, anywhere that you get our podcast. If you can like it, share it, subscribe to it, it goes very far in letting us know how we're doing and what content you find relevant moving forward. So today I am joined by James Lavery, the Director of Marketing for EMEA at MRI Software. And on today's episode, we will be discussing a new report recently released by MRI Software, charting UK property trends. And I am joined by James today. James, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good.
And we are in the midst of MRI Software's International Users Conference taking place in London this week. And what better time amidst all of this technology and innovation to get together and talk about what's happening in the industries, particularly what's happening in the EMEA region, Europe. Really excited to dive into this report, and I've already reviewed it. But before we get into this, James, I kind of wanted to ask the question, why? Why was it that MRI Software decided to initiate this kind of research?
Well, Nick, as you know, there's a lot of change going on in the industry, whether that be demographic trends, whether that be socioeconomic trends, whether that be Brexit, that's a familiar topic here in the UK, or whether that be environmental changes. So we really want to find out more about what's going on and how that's impacting property and real estate professionals. So that was one of the first reasons why we've conducted this survey and written the report.
Okay.
So we really want to dig into some real world data. There's no substitute for that because there's a lot that you can read about in the press, but we wanted the data to back that up and data in those certain sectors. And we've got a breadth of operations as well, and we wanted to go across all of those sectors and really dig into what's happening within those sectors. So those are the principal three reasons why we conducted the survey, and we really want to talk about it at events like IUC and engage with our clients at a time like this.
Well, let's talk about those sectors for a minute, because obviously the report's only as good as the data that's provided. So where did this information come from? Who was interviewed in the survey to put this report together? Where did the information come from?
So we went out to our user base and to a number of prospects that we're constantly dealing with, and we interviewed and surveyed 144 professionals, and they came from some of the higher levels within some of those companies, so senior managers, C-suite within those organizations, and we asked them a range of questions, very, very in-depth survey itself, and we conducted that survey over the space of November. So they've come back. We've analysed that data, and the report is ready now for publication.
All right, well, let's dig right in. And there's a lot of headlines in this report, and the first one I wanted to touch on has to do with retail, because it seems like retail was a common thread in this. And what was interesting was it wasn't necessarily about the evolution of retail, but what's happening to some of those retail properties, especially as it relates to the residential sector and turning and converting maybe some of those properties into different uses. And what can you tell me about some of the things we learned there?
Well, I think this goes back to the story of where we're positioned in the marketplace, Nick. So really, we have a set of retail solutions, a set of residential solutions, and there is quite a lot of interaction between those sort of sectors with some of the users of those solutions, and we want to just find out a little bit more. So it goes back to that first point that we talked about around why we wanted to do this.
Yeah.
So we really wanted to find out what was happening in the evolving residential marketplace, And there's a great demand for residential properties within the UK and specifically within large metropolitan areas. However, the land isn't sufficiently available for those properties to be developed. On the other hand, you've got this major shift within retail, where there's such a lot happening around online sales, etc., and retailers struggling on the high street. So you've got these two worlds that are sort of colliding. And what we want to dig into is really find out, well, what are the opportunities for the owners of the retail property space to actually diversify and move into residential development, which we're seeing more and more about. So anecdotally, we'd heard a lot of that within our customer base. We'd read a lot about that in the press. We wanted to dig into some of the stats behind that story. So that was the basis of our research there.
So let's talk about some of those stats. And one of the big headlines was almost 3/4. So I think the report said 72% of property professionals are seeing residential development from retail premises to giving that high street a new lease on life.
Yeah.
Which is fairly high. But then also 2/3, so 66%, think that retail property could be the biggest untapped resource for new residential development in the UK. And again, that goes back to what you're saying about limited availability of space, combined with this force of retail no longer being in demand coming together and really adapting the properties to suit both of those differing things that are happening in the industry.
Well, yeah, I think there's those two forces, as you say, and that's a perfect way of putting it. And they really are forces. So these are big things that are happening, not just within the property industry, but it's happening within the economy. And so that there's that huge sort of third force that's coming in and clashing. We're seeing very much with those residential developers lots of really, really interesting trends. So whether it be in the build to rent marketplace, where similar to in the US, where the sort of multifamily developments, the sort of professional large institutional investor has gone into the residential property sphere, that is taking off within the UK. And those sort of the innovative uses of land, whether it be an investor that might have a traditional sort of shopping centre portfolio, looking at going into areas such as the residential sphere with creating residential blocks around their shopping centre, or whether it be a transport owner, so maybe a public sector transport owner that is putting a residential block over their train station or a bus depot or wherever it happens to be, those sort of hubs of networks. And it's being creative about how developments happen. There goes that story back to the high street, where those landlords of residential premises are really thinking creatively about how they can actually get money out of that
survive. Yeah. And it's interesting because there is that force. There's multiple forces on the high street retail, right? You have online shopping that's hampering sales, and then there's this new convenience aspect that's involved too, where someone that's moving into a multifamily or a residential space is actually seeing as a benefit having first floor retail.
Oh, yeah.
And having that combination. So in one sense, people don't want to go to these retail shopping centers as much with the advancement of online shopping. But at the same time, as people start to build some of these new communities, they're keeping retail in mind as a new amenity, which is actually bringing retail right back to the forefront for the developer.
Yeah, to some extent, there's no such thing as commercial development anymore, or residential development. It is mixed use, and we've been seeing that for a long time within this particular geographic area, and worldwide for that matter. So those traditional sort of people that just concentrated in one asset class, it just it's practically unheard of nowadays. Or you look at it a bit uniquely. So that's a trend that's been happening for a long time and just will continue to evolve in that direction.
Okay, so talk to me about the stat related to the WeWork and co-working kind of spaces that are also evolving from retail. I saw that at the beginning of the research report.
So yeah, that's a really interesting point that just relates to what we've been talking about. So 4 out of 5 of those surveyed saw that there was a massive opportunity for people that were also in that sort of commercial retail space, converting into the office and co-working environment. So of course we've all heard and seen what's been happening within the office market, where we're looking at co-working facilities and shared office facilities, and there's lots of brands out there that are doing that. A couple of very obvious big ones, as we all know, and that stat sort of speaks to very much, people that own retail assets are looking at not just sort of converting them into residential use, but of course into that office use as well, and that sort of brings another sort of huge clash in, because people are looking at town centres as a different environment nowadays. They're looking at it as a working and a living and a shopping environment. So I'm not saying, Nick, that this is going to save the future of our high streets, but I am saying that there is change on the way and people are being creative about this.
And taking the amenity as one of the big draws for some of these properties and these developments. So whether that be that co-working space that has its own amenities, whether it be the residential properties that we already spoke of that have the retail component that becomes the amenity. And that's a change that's happened as we've seen the involvement of Generation Z and the millennials, where there's certain needs and desires that they have that, especially on the residential side, maybe weren't a priority for some of the older, residents and tenants of property. So what once became, an amenity of having washer and dryer units, we're now talking about high-speed broadband, internet access as becoming some of these big amenities.
Absolutely. We've seen that, and we did a bit of a comparison within this report to the counterpart report in the US that we conducted earlier on in the year.
Yeah.
And we saw some really interesting things. Strangely, the demands for some of the more technological aspects in the UK seem to be less. So they were there, people are wanting those things, but they're less of a priority. So one of the big things that those demographics that you talked about there are simply looking for is really good broadband.
Yeah.
They're not comparing, looking at things like sort of in unit laundry facilities. They're not looking at sort of payment portals or sort of maintenance portals like we saw in the US. Where that market is in some respects more evolved in terms of the sort of multifamily market that's been going on since the early 1990s. We're to some extent catching up a little bit, if you want a headline there in the UK. And people just want some of the more basic things at the moment. We all want good broadband. Who doesn't really?
Well, and who needs a nice retail space if they can order their stuff online with good broadband, right? Who needs a good plaza with a movie theater if you're able to just stream Netflix with no issue?
Exactly. Yeah. So that's a perfect example and perfect way of looking at it.
So staying on the technology front here for a second, one of the other headline findings in the report, over half of property professionals say connecting up or linking applications, processes, and data within their company is difficult. So moving on from the resident to the actual property managers themselves, looking to find an easier way to start to bring all of these processes together now seems to be top of mind for the majority.
Yeah, it is top of mind. It's growing as proptech evolves. So proptech is creating many different applications and many different solutions, and there's not one size fits all. So there's not one nirvana where we're going to get one solution, and so businesses have realized this, and they're looking at the best of breed in certain areas. They're looking at actually connecting up those applications and creating one ecosystem in their business of applications. So hey, they're going to want to do that easily, and we've seen it for quite a few years. This sort of trend happening, and doing that activity is what many people struggle with, and dare I say they need to look at providers that can have that open and connected mantra and that ethos behind their operations. So and having a good check on that and asking before they buy something, can I connect it? So that is one of the big trends. The other big trend in the tech sphere that we saw was data, and the amount of data that these businesses have got that they've developed over many years, and it was shown in the survey that it's not about having that data and collecting that data. It's about how it's used, how it's presented, and how it can be turned into sort of actionable insights. And we saw that 3/4 of the survey respondents said that they struggled with that. So which was a really interesting insight, and it's a back to that thing we sort of knew that, but it was just putting a number on it, Nick, which was really interesting. So putting a number on it is really what we've tried to do with this report, and that's why we wanted to do it.
And as technology evolves too, people are realizing that there's so many more uses for their data beyond the simple basic reporting that they may have had in the past, and there's plenty of different applications and ways to utilize this information to not only streamline their processes, but can really bring impactful, insight into what it is that they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. They might have a piece of data in there that they don't really know what the use of it for is until they start to mine that. So we've talked about sort of, especially in the residential sphere, where there's these businesses that might be looking at where they place developments, for instance, how they run those developments, but they could have some really useful data about their residents already that they're not mining and they're not utilizing. So it's about knowing how to dig into that, how to find it, and how to report on that. And that's a challenge that's gone on for a long time within property management. But I think it's really interesting to see that people are realizing that now, because it's something that businesses like this one has talked about for a long time and tried to help people with, but it's coming to the attention of people that it's a problem now. So that's really good.
So obviously you hear the phrase and the words prop tech. It's being used a lot, and in the survey there's a lot of organizations that were responding about the need to, whether it be, as we discussed, dealing with their data or finding solutions that can work together. The surprising thing in the survey that I saw, and hopefully you can speak to this, is that there was still a group of people that believe a lot of this is just noise. And, there's a lot of, when they're hearing all of these buzzwords, they're kind of more standoffish, waiting to kind of see how things are evolving. Can you kind of speak to that group as well?
Yeah, that's really interesting, and there's been a lot of commentary around this within the industry and a lot of blog posts about, is this the time for prop tech? Are these the years of prop tech? And many of the industry commentators have said, yes, it is, but it's going to take time. So I think we've been in prop tech for a long time as a business, and we've seen sort of many peaks and many troughs in that, and within the sort of the wider, more amplified noise of prop tech, there is a lot happening, and there's some really forward-thinking companies that are adopting it and trying to connect things up and use that sort of ecosystem approach and build better internal systems and better customer-facing systems out there. But there's many others that are just sitting back and seeing what's happening and seeing what are the best solutions, and frankly, there's some confusion out there as well. So I think that speaks to that sort of group that might just be sitting back there and maybe slightly confused by the marketplace.
Confused and waiting to see what actually becomes maybe of some of these technological advances. You hear blockchain, you hear robotic process automation, you hear artificial intelligence in real estate. I think in some instances it can make some companies feel a little more apprehensive about jumping feet first into something that may not be a proven technology yet.
Absolutely. You could even say scared.
Yeah.
As one word that just sort of sums it up.
Yeah.
So I think they need to oftentimes just sort of go back to basics, and it's interesting. We are holding a couple of sessions this year at our user conference that are sort of talking around that subject, both within the sort of residential sphere and within the wider marketplace. What people should be thinking about when they're adopting technology. So we're hoping to help people and guide them through that process as well.
So speaking of processes, maybe we should turn the discussion towards Brexit. I know that was another piece to this report, and some interesting statistics and thoughts came out of that. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting time here in the UK, and it's such a huge topic. And we thought to ourselves, will we ask a question on Brexit? And we mulled it over long and hard about that, but we thought we can't ask people about the industry and not ask them about this subject in this particular time, because there's been so much talk and noise about it. At a dinner party you mentioned Brexit and everybody moans, but it is headline news. So.
And it will affect one way or the other the way that some of these businesses are going to handle their operations.
It'll affect probably how we all live in the UK for a good while now, but. In terms of the survey, there are some really interesting things. The marketplace seems to be quite buoyant and quite upbeat about the future. And some of the stats that we got were that 29% of the marketplace felt that a Brexit of really any kind would probably not, whether that be soft or hard, would probably not affect the industry too much.
Which is surprising to me. That feels low.
Well, it did. It felt low to me as well. And we started to analyse the responses and analyse the mood of the industry around those. And it really seems that people are quite sort of confident based upon the past history. So the property industry is subject to ups and downs. We've all been through a lot as property professionals. And we've seen what's happened in the past, not just the past 10 years, but if you go back into further cycles, we've all been up and we've all been down. And I think that's the mood of the industry is, hey, we've been through this before. We know what happens. We know how to handle it. We know how to sort of retrench into the position where we need to be. So that's where we felt that there was a feeling in the industry was towards that area. So interesting, surprising to me as well. But once you look at it in a bit more detail, it tends to make sense.
Yeah. So that's kind of Brexit from the property manager perspective, and the property organizations. But now let's kind of shift Brexit to the actual impacted, maybe home buyer, renter, someone in the space looking at renting or buying a property. What kind of findings did you see on that end?
Well, so there was a real sentiment around this that it would help the home buyer, but not the renter. So, and that's financially, I mean, in that respect.
Yeah.
So rents would stay high. There's a potential that buying prices might fall, and that sort of supports some of the sort of governmental banking analysis that's out there as well, that there's a chance based upon differing models of Brexit, whichever way you look at it, that there could possibly be house price falls helping the buyer. But rental demand would still stay strong, sort of based upon sort of added value services and activities within the rental market and what's happening out there. So,
and the demand is still going up for these rental properties as well, as seen as we saw earlier in our discussion, or as we heard earlier in our discussion about how they're continuing to build these properties as well on the rental side.
Yeah, absolutely, and there still seems to be this sort of demand based upon sort of the lifestyle of certain demographics to rent and the desire to rent. That just seems to be the trajectory of the future for the marketplace around residential rentals, and the industry sort of supports that. And some of the findings, just going right back to the beginning again, really dug into that, and we found that there was still this sort of push on in the build to rent marketplace, where it isn't just a bubble, it's an asset class that's here for the long term, and we've seen it in the US. So some of the companies in the US in 1993 had 9,000 units, and now they're 400,000 unit plus operations. So that's what people are looking at, and that's what people are looking to emulate and build that asset class up even bigger. And people think that that's here to stay.
Well, James, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. And before we close it out, do you have any kind of parting words or any feedback or anything else you'd like to say about the report?
Well, I think I'll just go back to that first point. We really wanted some real world data, Nick, and we've achieved that. And I think we really also wanted to see what the sentiment was out there as well. So that was some of the objectives of the report. And just on that sentiment, there is a lot of change. The industry sees the change. They're not unaware. They've got an opinion. And I think they're very optimistic and they see opportunity. So whether that be in the high street, whether that be in office, whether that be in the residential sphere, people are enabling themselves for that change and enabling themselves through technology. And some of the more forward-thinking organizations are doing that. So it makes us happy as well to hear that, because hey, we're a technology organization and we're here to support that change, and that's what we're building here within MRI, and we're looking forward to helping people with those challenges.
James, thank you so much for joining me.
Okay.
I know you have a busy week with the International Users Conference, and I appreciate you taking the time to share the report.
No, very enjoyable. Thank you.
So if you'd like to see the report for yourself, get some of this insight and data, there will be a link. You should find it in the show notes. However you are listening to this podcast, you'll be able to find more information as well at mri.com/UK. And if you like building success and want to hear more of it, please check out mrisoftware.com/building success. Thank you so much for your time, and until next time, we will see you later.